There are a ton of different ways to edit a photo. Some use curves, others use sliders. However, most of us would use a combination of all different tools that you'll find in Lightroom. However, in this video, I want to share with you another way to edit your photos, which in some cases can really bring your images to life. Also, this video is sponsored by Squarespace, but more on them later on. The first thing I want to say is that this will not apply to every single photo. Matter of fact, I only use this on about 20% of my edits. On many photos, this is simply unnecessary and overkill. However, on no select few, it can really work wonders. So let's start by looking at what types of photos would I typically use this method on. The main criteria is that there is a clear and strong source of light with plenty of natural contrast. The second criteria is that the image has a bunch of features or elements that would need either emphasizing, editing, or fixing. Let's have a look at these examples to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So let's have a look at the first image, which is from New York. So there's all the elements that I've just mentioned in this image. First of all, we have a strong and clear source of light, which is the sun. We have a lot of natural contrast, which is of course the brighter areas of the image, the sun, the sky, the reflection on the ground, and we have the darker side of the image, which is the shadow of the building. And finally, we have a few elements which would need to be emphasized, such as the steam in the middle of the image, the traffic light, and the actual truck itself. The second image takes us to Jerusalem. Now, this was about 2019, and this was in the Old Town in one of the narrow market streets. You have a very clear and strong source of light flooding into the dark market, therefore creating that natural contrast. We have a lot of detail that we need to work with. We have all the colors, all of the carpets and all of the clothes and bits and bobs, not to mention the main character, the subject, which is the guy in the middle. The final example takes us to Leadenhall Market in the city of London. Again, we've got all the same characteristics that I would look for. We have contrast, we have a good strong source of light, and we have little details around the scene that would need to be emphasized or worked with. So now we know roughly what types of images this works best with. What is this method? Well, it's using mostly local adjustments to do most of the editing on the image. Let's have a look at the actual method and break it all down. The first thing we need to do is to baseline the image and get a good starting point. For me, this will include making sure that the overall exposure and the white balance is roughly correct, making sure that the crop and the geometry of the image is good. Applying a preset to give myself a creative direction or a general theme from which to edit further. And finally, making a few global tweaks just to get the image to an overall good starting point. The method itself will use all of the local adjustment tools that Lightroom or even Capture One offers you. So that could be the radial filter, the linear gradient, the brush, or even in Lightroom it could be the new AI tools such as Subject Select, Sky Select, or even I think Object Select is the latest one. We can use the linear gradient tool to shift one whole part of the image. We can use the radial tools in order to focus on specific areas. We can use the brush tools to dodge and burn, and we can obviously use the AI tools to select your skies or your subjects for individual editing. So now you have an overall idea of how this method works. Let's now jump into a few examples and edit them together so you can see how I would do it in real time. For this, I'll be using my For this, I'll be using my iPad and Lightroom. However, you can use any editing app as long as it's got selective editing features. So the first image takes us to November 2021. This is quite a well-known image that I've taken, and this was in Soho. It's a noodle bar. It was in the winter, obviously, so it is quite cold outside, therefore you get the steam. And then you have the two clear light sources, different colors, and obviously the silhouette of the lady there as well. So let's start first of all with the geometry. I always do auto geometry. So now the image is nice and straight. Let's quickly sort out the crop. I want her in the middle. Looks good. Let's quickly apply a preset, and we're going to look at, for this particular one, I'll go for muted, or shall I go for green? I'll go for muted. Now, of course, you can just edit the image completely from scratch. Personally, I use my presets because they're my own presets, therefore it's my own creative direction, so it just helps me out. Overall, we have a pretty good starting point. So that's the starting point. Now we can start editing selectively. The first thing I want to do is exaggerate these two sources of light. So we can start with the top one, and for this I will use a radial gradient, and then I will apply it sort of like so. And then we can make sure that the exposure we can increase, slightly reduce the highlights. But the main thing I want to do here is to cool it down, like so, and even add a bit of blue and really cool it down, like so. Okay, all right, that's good. Now, the next thing I want to do is do the same at the bottom and add another gradient here. And then I'm going to warm this one up like so. Probably increase the contrast a bit, increase the exposure, drop the blacks like so. Okay, then I want to clean up the sides and just take some of the attention away from the sides. So what I'm going to do is add a linear gradient, bring it in like so, and then I just want to slightly drop the exposure like so. Increase contrast. In terms of colour, I think I want to probably cool that down a bit as well, like that. Then we can add another linear gradient and just clean this up a bit. Again, drop that down. Okay, pretty happy with that. Now in terms of the lady, what we can do is just increase like so, and then slightly drop that down like so. So just a few little edits, and this is where we've started, and this is where we've come from. And in total, we have a few of these local adjustments, and put together, we've created this effect. Okay, next example is, it's actually the same week, to be honest, that I took the previous photo. So as before, let's get the geometry done first, make sure everything is straight. In terms of the crop, to be honest with you, I am pretty happy with that. I might just take a bit off the edge on the right-hand side and just move the image up. But apart from that, I think overall, it's pretty good. Now let's apply a preset just to give it a creative direction. Now personally, I love the green on this particular one, and it gives us a good starting point. So what do we actually want to achieve here? So first of all, I want to exaggerate the colors, and I want to bring out a few of the details. So the first detail I want to bring out is where it says bun house at the top. It gives you an idea of where this is, and I think it will just look better with that visible. So let's bring that down like so, and then increase the exposure. Just drop the highlights slightly, drop the contrast. And then as for color, I really want to cool that down a bit, so we can go down like so. Now overall, I'm happy with that, but the actual wording bun house is not as visible as I hoped. So I'm going to add a radial filter on top of that, and that will target just that area, and I can just bring it up a little bit more on its own, like so. So that's a good start. Next is the colors. So we've got red and blue, and that's what we're going to work with. Let's start with the red. So we'll add a radial gradient, like so. Let's boost the exposure a bit, drop the highlights. And when I go into color, we will add a bunch of red in there. Okay. Now let's do another radial gradient, like so. And then this one will go behind. And same thing, just slightly boost the exposure, drop the highlights. And this one I want to cool it down. So for this, I'll go to the color and just add a bit of blue there. Okay, now I would like to maybe enhance the subject a bit. So let's see what select subject does here. Okay, that's not too bad. So now let's slightly boost her a little bit like so. Okay, that looks good. Now there is a few details. So you see where you have the door on your right hand side, and then you have the light inside. I think that can be a bit more yellow. I think it will look pretty cool. So let's just add another gradient right there. So what we can do is we can just boost the exposure, drop the highlights a little bit, and we can really add yellow there. Now, see if that works. If not, if it needs a bit more, there we go. So the temperature has done it. Now on the door itself, I would like to add a bit of coolness to the door. So another radial gradient like so. Actually no, this doesn't work here. So instead what we're going to do is add a brush, and using the brush I just want to really highlight the door. It doesn't have to be the whole thing because only part of it is obviously lit up. So now if I just slightly boost the exposure, but the main thing I want to do is just to cool it down like so, just add a bit more blue to it. Okay, and done. So this is where we've started and this is where we are now, and using mostly local adjustments we've highlighted and worked with all the individual parts of the image and brought the whole edit to life. Again, as I've said before, to achieve this using just global adjustments would pretty much be impossible. Okay, moving on to the last example. This is the most recent image. It's actually from Dubai, from the old souk, literally like 2-3 weeks ago. So the lighting there was just insane. It was the afternoon, the sun was out, and this guy was standing there. The light was hitting him so well, and I managed to get this shot that I'm really happy with. So let's start again. Geometry, you want to make sure the image is overall straight. Now, sometimes, as you can see, geometry doesn't work very well, and that's where we can either do it manually or we can do it by just making sure the overall rotation is good. Now, I don't need to do the geometry here. There aren't really any straight lines that we need to fix. I'm quite happy with that. In terms of the crop, again, I'm happy with the crop as it is. Maybe just take a bit out like so. Overall, I am pleased. Again, global exposure, global white balance is good, and we're gonna mess around with it anyway. Now let's apply one of my presets. I'll go muted on this one. I think that's a good starting point, and that's certainly the creative direction that I want to go in. So let's look at the image, and what do we want to do? First of all, we want to exaggerate the temperature difference between the light and the shadow, and we want to exaggerate the subject's details as well. So how are we going to do that? First of all, let's add a radial gradient to where the window is. And this will be our source of light. So we're going to do it quite big like so. And we're going to point it at him like so. Now for this, I am going to slightly increase the exposure, not too much, reduce the highlights, but the main edit here would be the color. So I really want to warm this bit of the image up like so. Actually, whilst I'm here, I do want to drop the clarity just a bit. And maybe drop, no, I'll leave the contrast and leave the clarity at -7. I think that's good. Now, the next thing I want to do is rebalance the image because overall it's a bit too warm. So what I'm going to do here is go to linear gradient, and I'm going to draw it kind of like that. And for this, I'm going to slightly drop the exposure and slightly cool it down as well. Now, what you can do is you can actually add to the gradient, and what I'm going to do is go add to mask to, and I'm going to add a radial gradient. So I'm going to just basically cover this little area just at the top, like so. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now let's look at a few details. So I want to really exaggerate his hand, so we can do that with the radial gradient again, just like so. And to do that, I can just slightly increase the exposure, again, drop the highlights, maybe increase the contrast. That looks pretty good to me. Now, there is a bit of red in the top left of the image, which I find a bit distracting, but what we can do is a radial gradient, cover the red bit there, and there's two options. Either I can just drop the exposure, but more so what I can do is just go into the color, just take some of the color out. So it just removes that kind of red spot there. Okay, now honestly, I think his back and his head is a bit too underexposed. So I'm gonna just add a radial gradient and just slightly bring up the exposure around here. Like so. Maybe just the temperature just a bit. Okay, that's a bit better. All right, and overall I am pleased. That's where we've started, and that's kind of where we've finished. Now it's time for a quick pause to thank the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. Squarespace is my go-to all-in-one platform for managing my portfolio, blog, and online store. With Squarespace, I can better optimize my website so that it comes up in search and I get more eyeballs on my work. But the best bit is that I can actively manage it from anywhere in the world using any device. Whether you're just starting out or already have an established business, Squarespace is a great choice. If this is something that interests you, click on the link below for a free trial and then 10% off your first purchase. Thank you to you for watching this bit of the video, and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring. Now it's time for a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. They gave me a platform to make my own online portfolio so I can share my photos outside of social media. Squarespace also allowed me to give my photos context by turning them into written blogs. This allowed me to elevate the quality of my work, rank in search, and provide others with value. If you always wanted your own corner of the internet, may I recommend using Squarespace as your tool of choice. If this is something that interests you, click on the link below for a free trial and then 10% off your first purchase. Thank you to you for watching this bit of the video, and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring. Okay, that's all I wanted to share with you today. I hope you found this video useful, and I hope it just gave you a few more ideas in terms of editing. As I've said before, this will not replace your main editing style and approach. You'll still do most of your editing as global editing to the whole image using your curves, your sliders, all of that kind of stuff. But this is more just another kind of tool in your arsenal when you do edit photos, to think that if you can't achieve a look globally, maybe this method will help you achieve that look by targeting local areas. So give it a go, let me know what you think, leave that opinion down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. So thank you ever so much for watching, thank you for the continued support, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.